Connect multiple devices simultaneously. Internet like a boss. SLT Mobitel Fiber. Connect multiple devices simultaneously. Internet like a boss. SLT Mobitel Fiber.
රෝස සුවඳ තවත් දෙකෝ කලක් රැඳෙන්න ඩබල් පර්ෆියුම් ලුක් සමගින් එන නව සන්ලයිට් රෝස්.
Tonight, no work to do. The Sapugaskanda refinery is set to be closed for the second time this year due to the dollar dearth for crude purchases. Sky high. Imported milk powder prices set to be raised at midnight tonight. Price hike in local products also on the cards. No time to rest yet. 5 studies confirm Omicron doesn't cause severe lung infection. The WHO, however, wants not to let the guard down. All that and much more coming up on First at 9. This Thursday, the 30th of December 2021.
සියයට සියක් ස්වාභාවිකව ලබාගත් සාරයන් සමග නව ලයිෆ් බොයි කෝමාරිකා.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammike Kanaya. Now then, the Ministry of Energy today announced that the Sapugaskanda oil refinery will be closed from the 3rd of January, but expects it to recommence operations before the month is out. The ministry gave the prevailing forex shortage as the reason for the closure, but added that the refinery will restart operations when its Singaporean supplier can supply again on the 26th of January. A communique released today also shed light on some of the other reasons behind the move, but assured that no fuel shortage will ensue just as it was during the last month's closure.
The Sapugaskanda oil refinery, Sri Lanka's largest, is set to be closed for the second time in the past few months by the Ministry of Energy. Subject Minister Udaya Gamampila announced that the refinery will be closed from the 3rd of January due to a lack of available foreign exchange to pay for crude oil purchases. He added, however, that operations are expected to resume before the 30th of January. Despite this, the minister assured the public that no fuel shortage will occur as a result. This announcement comes after Sri Lanka temporarily halted operations at Sapugaskanda last month in a bid to save foreign exchange through the suspension of crude oil imports. The refinery was reopened on the 7th of this month after 22 days of closure. In a communique issued today, the Energy Ministry explained further that the long-term contract for crude oil supply was awarded to a Singaporean company back in January this year. According to the agreement, the company needs to be informed 90 days in advance for purchases of Murban crude oil that is refined at the Sapugaskanda facility. It adds that due to this, the Singaporean company can only resume supply on the 26th of January. Further, due to the country's current forex issues, making emergency purchases of crude has become a difficult prospect, prompting the closure of the facility. The statement also says that Sri Lanka's recent credit rating decline has compounded the situation, making it near impossible to purchase crude on credit. However, the ministry assures that the temporary closure of the Sapugaskanda oil refinery will not lead to a fuel shortage in the country, as the facility only accounts for 14% of the country's petrol and 29% of its diesel requirements.
නියම ක්වලිටියට හැදෙන අලුත් තියාරා රස පදමට අලුත් වෙලා.
5 international studies have so far found that the Omicron COVID variant does not lead to severe lung infection, meaning there's little chance of a patient developing COVID pneumonia. Some countries, such as the United States, have also slashed the quarantine period of COVID patients. Amid these developments, the World Health Organization is urging countries and people to keep their guard up, as later findings about Omicron may differ from early studies.
In just over a month since the Omicron variant was first identified, many preliminary studies have produced findings contrary to the initial beliefs regarding the variant. Scientists, including the World Health Organization, raised alarm when the variant was first discovered over the possibility of it causing more transmissions and deaths. Since then, however, 5 preliminary studies have confirmed that Omicron's ability to cause severe disease is low. The studies were conducted in Liverpool and Cambridge in the UK, Belgium, Japan and Hong Kong. They all say that Omicron shows decreased lung infection. This means that the variant is less capable of developing into COVID pneumonia, which may lead to death. However, health experts say that this doesn't mean that transmissibility of the variant is low or that Omicron patients wouldn't develop long COVID. Nevertheless, these studies and observations of people developing less severe disease have prompted health authorities in some countries to revise the quarantine procedure. The Centers for Disease Control in the United States has recommended that the isolation period for COVID patients with mild symptoms be reduced to just 5 days. It says that isolation of 5 days followed by wearing a well-fitting mask will minimize the risk of spreading the virus to others. When quizzed about the US CDC's move, Director of the Health Emergencies Program at the World Health Organization, Dr. Mike Ryan, had this to say.
These are judgment calls that the countries make. What countries are trying to do is to be maximally effective at picking up cases or not having onward transmission, but minimally impacting on people's lives, social and economic and educational lives. And it is always a judgment. The likelihood of someone developing symptoms after 5 or 6 or 7 days goes down exponentially. But there is a possibility of longer incubation periods. But the average incubation period up to now has been around 5 days, 6 days. But there's a range of those incubations. There is some data to suggest that the incubation period for Omicron may be shorter, but there will still be a very wide range around a lower average, even if that average turns out to be lower. And the data is not certain on that because we're dealing with a very limited number of studies and a limited number, again, of individuals. We're talking mainly about younger people. Maybe younger people have a shorter incubation period than older people. We don't know that. We need to be very careful with interpreting these data. If people shorten the quarantine period, there will be a small number of cases that will develop disease and potentially go on to transmit because they've been let out of quarantine earlier. But that will be a relatively small number. A lot of people who won't transmit will also be released from that quarantine. So it is a trade-off between the science and being absolutely perfect in what you try to do, but then having the minimum disruption that you can possibly have to your economy and your society. And governments are struggling to find that balance.
The balancing act aside, the stance of the WHO is that the focus should also be given to the negative aspects of these early studies without limiting it to the positive elements. The advice is to not take Omicron lightly, as overburdened health systems may lead to deaths, despite early lack of severity compared to Delta. Meanwhile, here in Sri Lanka, authorities are urging people not to be complacent in the face of the relatively low number of daily cases. They warn that a sharp spike in cases is very much possible, especially following the festive season.
At the moment, Sri Lanka is enjoying kind of a good situation where despite opening the country for social and economic activities, the number of cases reported has remained at least static, if not increased. But this situation may not be there continuously, and we have to take every possible precaution to make sure that there will be no serious repercussions as a result of our behavior, especially during this festival season. So I would like to request everyone to adhere to the health guidelines to the letter and make sure that the current trend is at least maintained like this. If we can bring down the numbers further, that will be much more interesting and important.
In the meantime, local health authorities have observed a resurgence in enthusiasm among the people in getting the booster dose against COVID. Over the recent week, health experts were lamenting the low turnout at vaccination centres, and they say that the daily numbers have breached 120,000 over the past 3 days.
Sri Lanka has been battling misinformation from the very inception of the vaccine rollout against COVID. Various online groups with vested interests fed people wrong information. The possibility of subfertility and impotence are just two of the elements fearmongers used in their campaign during the first 2-dose administration drive. Then, when the booster dose came into the picture, they were at it again. In recent weeks, health authorities complained of a lack of enthusiasm for the booster dose. But as it turns out, Sri Lanka is not the only country which is having to arduously counter lies about vaccination.
Misinformation and disinformation, often spread by a small number of people, have been a constant distraction, undermining science and trust in life-saving health tools. In the huge waves of cases currently seen in Europe and in many countries around the world, misinformation, which has driven vaccine hesitancy, is now translating to the unvaccinated disproportionately dying.
But there is some positive news on the local front, especially across the last 3 days.
We have seen a kind of improvement in getting the third dose of Pfizer vaccine at the moment. Over 150,000 persons have received the vaccine daily over the past many days. And this is a very good sign where most of the misinformation and beliefs that were not conducive to get this vaccine has now, I think, waning off. And therefore, I would say that this situation could improve. And taking the current situation into consideration, I would like to request everyone who has not taken the third dose of Pfizer vaccine up to now, if they have completed 3 months after getting the second dose, please make sure that you are going to get the third dose or booster dose of Pfizer vaccine on the due date.
So far, Sri Lanka has administered the first dose of a vaccine to 15,989,319 people and the second dose to 13,840,279 people. Meanwhile, the booster has been administered to 3,857,504 people at the moment. As a percentage, the country has fully vaccinated 63% of the entire population with the 2-dose regime. And that is close to what is considered the magic target of 70%, which experts say will end the acute phase of the pandemic if achieved. But the composition of that 70% is crucial.
There is this narrative now going on, which is like it's milder or it's less severe, but we're undermining the other side. At the same time, it could be dangerous because the high transmission rate, the transmissibility could increase hospitalization and deaths. And we have already said that, and we're seeing this. So we shouldn't undermine the bad news just focusing on the good news. There are both elements here. And in our approach, I think we can make use of, how the virus behaves without undermining it. So we shouldn't undermine. There are things that we don't know, and, we will know more. But until then, it's better not to undermine.
Moving on with other local news, the prices of imported milk powder will be increased come midnight. The Milk Powder Importers Association said the price hike is due to the global price increase. However, locally manufactured powdered milk as well as liquid milk are also set for a price hike.
On the 9th of October, prices of imported milk powder were raised. The move saw a kilogram of milk powder going up by 250 rupees and a 400-gram pack of milk powder by 100 rupees. But other issues such as the lack of sufficient forex meant imported milk powder was not plentiful in supply. And today, the Milk Powder Importers Association announced another price hike with effect from midnight. It will result in a kilogram of imported milk powder going up by 150 rupees, meaning a 1 kilogram packet will now cost the consumer 1,345 rupees. Meanwhile, the price of a 400-gram pack of imported milk powder too is hiked by 60 rupees, with the new price set at 540 rupees.
මිල වැඩි වුණේ ප්‍රධාන හේතුව ජාත්‍යන්තර වෙළඳපොලේ වෙන්දේසි මිල වැඩි වෙච්ච නිසා. එතකොට දැන් වෙළඳපොලේ කිරිපිටි යම්කිසි හිඟයක් තියෙනවා කියලා අපි පිළිගන්නේ නැහැ. තියෙනවා. ඒකට ප්‍රධාන හේතුව තමයි අපිට ණයවර ලිපි විවෘත කරගන්න දුෂ්කරතාවයක් තියෙනවා. දේශීය සහ විදේශීය බැංකුවල ඩොලර් සම්බන්ධයෙන් යම්කිසි හිඟයක් තියෙනවා. ඒක ලැබුණොත් මේ තියෙන හිඟ තත්ත්වය අපිට සෑහෙන ප්‍රමාණයකින් අඩු කරගන්න පුළුවන් කියලා අපිට විශ්වාසයක් තියෙනවා.
He, however, said that the milk powder importers are expecting to increase orders come February next year, once the forex issue is addressed. In the meantime, State Minister of Livestock, Farm Promotion and Dairy and Egg-related Industries D.B. Herath also warned of a possible price hike in local milk powder as well. Speaking to media, he said a price hike is inevitable. He, however, noted that the expected price hike will not be at the same level as imported milk powder, and he expects the price of a 400-gram pack of local milk powder to go up by around 20 rupees, with the price of a kilogram of locally produced milk powder expected to increase further. In this backdrop, there is also a possibility of liquid milk prices also going up in the market.
Some of the areas of the agriculture has a little bit hardly hit by some of the non-availability of required fertilizers and so on, which will make a little bit difficult in farmers and other entities to sustain their production as they expected. Usually Sri Lanka need around almost 1,200 million liters of milk. The current production is around 35 to 40%. The rest will import it. The production and feed availability and also cost of feed is very rapidly increasing.
Though that is the case, the chairman of the state-owned Milko Private Limited insisted that there are no plans to hike their prices of powdered milk or liquid milk.
An association representing fishermen in Tamil Nadu has accused the Sri Lankan Navy of violating the human rights of Indian poachers during their arrests in Sri Lankan territorial waters. The accusations allege that the Navy had violated their rights by spraying them with sanitizer before making physical contact. However, the Navy has rubbished the claims, explaining that they were only given face masks after they were boarded.
The issue of poaching by Indian fishermen in Sri Lankan waters has been a thorn in the side of local fishermen and authorities as well. At the height of Sri Lanka's pandemic-related restrictions this year, the issue flared up when the Sri Lankan Navy found itself facing a sticky situation with regards to the interception of Indian vessels. With the country's borders being strictly guarded to prevent the entry of COVID-infected illegal immigrants from India and the focus shifting away from high seas interceptions, it became open season on Sri Lanka's rich fishing grounds. Further, the heightened risk to Sri Lanka's naval personnel from any physical contact with Indian fishermen during these interceptions also played a big part. This situation also emboldened Indian fishermen, with reports of them resorting to violence against not only Sri Lanka's own fisher communities, but against naval craft as well. The Sri Lanka Navy says that previously hostile and dangerous maneuvers have been employed by Indian fishing boats when being approached by naval patrol craft, forcing them to deploy emergency evasive measures to avoid damage and injury to its personnel. However, since the beginning of this month, the Sri Lanka Navy has begun actively engaging in operations to seize Indian fishing trawlers. Up to now, in the Navy's latest attempts to secure Sri Lanka's territorial waters, a large number of boats have been seized and 68 crew arrested. All 68 are now facing Sri Lanka's justice system, where if they are found guilty of illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, could find themselves jailed for 2 years or suspended for 5. Their boats and fishing gear will also be forfeit as well. This has led to protests in India's southern Tamil Nadu state, led by Chief Minister M.K. Stalin, who last week urged the central government to establish India's traditional fishing rights in the Pork Strait and guard the lives of its fishermen. Stalin's demands, however, shed light on the main issue at hand between the fisher communities of the two nations. That is, despite Sri Lanka's maritime boundaries and traditional fishing waters having been ratified through the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, this fact is somewhat lost on South India's fisher communities and its politicians. Now the pressure is being upped against Sri Lanka again, with the Fishermen's Rights Association of Tamil Nadu accusing the Sri Lankan Navy today of violating the human rights of Indian fishermen during their arrests. The accusations, however, are not of the Navy using violence and causing bodily harm to the fishermen, rather of spraying sanitizer on them before taking them into custody. The Sri Lanka Navy has denied this, with spokesman Captain Indika De Silva explaining that in the past sanitizer has only been used to sterilize Indian boats before naval personnel board the craft to pilot them to shore. He adds that in recent operations this month, the Navy had only issued face masks to Indian crewmen and have not sanitized their vessels. With continued protests being carried out in Tamil Nadu's coastal cities, causing disruptions to daily life, the issue seems to be one that the Indian government can't ignore. The question now remains whether diplomatic channels will be used to free the 68 Indian fishermen and their boats, as it has been the case in the past, or will the Sri Lankan Navy be given a free hand to continue unhindered its patrols in the country's northern and eastern seas.
The police in Seychelles have launched an investigation into the death of a Sri Lankan. Reports say that the probe was launched after an autopsy report showed that the victim was strangled. His body had been found on Friday the 10th of December at around 8:50 a.m. in a private house of a businessman who was employing the Sri Lankan national in Ladiga. A police statement quoted the relevant businessman, who owns a construction company, as saying that he went to look for the Sri Lankan after he did not turn up for work for 4 days. When the businessman reached the house, he had not seen anybody, and when he went to look through the bedroom window, he had seen his employee on the ground and not responding. The businessman had then contacted the police. An examination conducted at the house had not revealed any visible signs of on the victim's body, but 3 days later an autopsy recommended by the police showed that the Sri Lankan national had died due to strangulation. Seychelles police said that no arrests have been made so far and that the probe is underway. We will see you shortly on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, the Colombo Stock Exchange announced today that it has adopted the United Nations Women's Empowerment Principles. The set of principles are a primary vehicle for corporate delivery on gender equality dimensions of 2030 Agenda and UN Sustainable Development Goals. In a communique issued today, the CSE explained that this was part of its continued commitment to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, marketplace and community. Commenting on the developments, CSE Chief Executive Officer Rajiva Bandaranaike stated that the CSE has remained strongly focused on creating an enabling culture for women by ensuring that workplace-related policies are gender-sensitive and equal. He added that the CSE boasts sound women representation and understands this translating into a strong presence of women in top management. CSE Head of Human Resources Anuja Senanaike explained that as a signatory, the CSE will gain access to tools, resources and access to valuable insight into international best practices in gender equality and women's empowerment. Meanwhile, Sri Lankan shares closed higher today as strong gains in the consumer discretionary sector countered losses in energy stocks. The CSE All Share Price Index, which is set for its best year since 2010, rose 0.88% to 12,019.75 points at the closing bell. The S&P SL 22 got in on the action with a gain of 24 points to close at 4,225.23. Now with that, here's Vidushika Pereira with a more detailed take on today's trading.
We saw a major spike in the market while SPI establishing itself well within the green zone, surpassing 12,000 points milestone and generating 105 points intraday gain for the session. So the session witnessed high retail participation, recording more than 58,000 transactions and generated a healthy turnover of 6.5 billion involving 509 million shares. Again, food, beverage and tobacco sector dominated the turnover, followed by capital goods sector with a joint contribution of 39%. Today we saw 6 crossings recorded in the market for a total value of 513 million, and the retail favorite counters in the transportation sector and food, beverage and tobacco sector saw a sizable number of trades during the day while generating capital gains, and the plantation rally that we saw during the previous sessions continued for yet another day with increased investor confidence and investor attraction towards the oil palm cultivator as a result of the elevated global palm oil prices.
The Sri Lankan rupee, meanwhile, continues to remain at 202.99 cents against the US dollar. Now let's take a look at how it fared against other major currencies during the day. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.